What's up?
How's it going?
My name's Amman.
I'm Alex.
Nice to meet you.
So it's Black History Month. So I was hoping you could kind of walk me through your past and kind of how you came to understand Black history, mostly through education, how you were sort of raised to understand it, and whether or not you feel that was kind of well reflected in history
Right.
lessons as you grew up.
I grew up in a predominantly white city, Thousand Oaks, California, in Ventura County, Southern California. I got a really high quality public education from there. And looking back at it, I really can tell I had some teachers that allowed me to think critically. As it pertains to Black history and Black History Month, I have both positive and negative memories from that time, dating back to elementary school. In 7th grade, I believe, I did a group project with 2 other classmates where we had to do something about the Underground Railroad and just kind of speak on that. And so we decided to reenact the Underground Railroad. Of course, I was the only Black person in my group. So I was Harriet Tubman in our video that ended up on YouTube. And I just remember, being at my classmate's house and they had oranges in the kitchen. So I put oranges in my chest to act like Harriet Tubman. Right. And so that was a fond memory that I look back on when I think of Black history in my public education that I received growing up. And I think I look back at it fondly because it highlighted Black history, right? And somebody like Harriet Tubman.
It's almost kind of like giving you center stage to really
Right.
express that, bring that
Exactly.
to you.
Exactly. And I have to say, I think if I remember correctly, it was a pretty funny video, for 7th graders to watch in class. So I think it was a hit in my classroom and everybody enjoyed it. And I think, it was ultimately a positive experience. On the flip side, there were more negative experiences, I'd say, than positive when it comes to Black history in my pre-collegiate education. The most prominent memory that I can remember, and it happened on many occasions, too many to count, is whenever we'd be reading our history textbooks in class and the topic of slavery would come up. And more times often than not, I was the only Black student in the classroom. And it was just something that I could feel in the room, right? And I think everybody else felt it too. It wasn't just me feeling it. I think it was the class growing up and becoming their own individuals and realizing that, whoa, what is this that we're feeling in the room? Because it was definitely something in the air. I specifically remember feeling uncomfortable whenever we'd talk about slavery and almost to the point where I'd be kind of sweating a little bit and kind of feeling hot, just because I was nervous and I felt like people were looking at me or whatever.
Do you feel like that was kind of a really formative part of your identity at the time? Because this is kind of this communal setting with all the people you're close to. Your kind of ancestry is laid bare, essentially, and you're kind of forced to almost relive that.
Yeah, that's a good point you bring up, and that my answer to that is yes and no, because I was in a interesting spot as far as my identity goes. And yes, I'm Black and I'm African American, but I'm also first generation African American, and both my parents were born in Ethiopia. So it's a little bit different, the history of my family compared to maybe other African Americans that are in the States. And that was something that I knew nobody else understood in my classroom. They just assumed I'm Black, so I must have descended from the slaves of the slavery era. When in actuality, that's not the case, and that Black people can come from a lot of other places than just the South, right? In America. So yeah, so yes and no, in that I related to it because I'm Black for sure, but in the same sense, I also noticed like that I have a unique identity in being
spiritual
Ethiopian.
difference between African descendants of slaves and just Africans in general.
Right.
That's not really something that most Americans are kind of considering. It's just,
Right.
it becomes a really one-dimensional identity to anyone who's not part of that.
Exactly. Exactly.
Do you feel that overall Black History Month maybe contributes to that kind of one-dimensionalizing of Blackness?
Definitely. Uh, Definitely. And actually, on the note of Black History Month, in my pre-collegiate education, I don't remember Black History Month being like a thing in my classrooms. We definitely like had instances where we learned about Black history, but and I'm not sure if it's my memory failing me because I was young or not, but I can't recall us like having a big, Black History Month and let's focus on this. And maybe part of the reason why was because it would have been like so uncomfortable for maybe a student like me, because I felt uncomfortable just with the word slave, and a lot of other students did. So I think it was, you know, the system avoiding the issue.
So you mentioned a little bit, we were kind of talking about identity and how that's kind of influenced by Black History Month and this kind of like shared collective knowledge of it. I was hoping maybe you could go a little bit more in depth and talk about, over the years, how your identity has kind of been molded, shaped, changed by Black History Month.
Yeah. For me, that question is different than what some may like think my answers may be, because like as I mentioned, I am first generation Ethiopian American, as you might be able to tell by what I'm wearing and like the necklace that I have.
Maybe you could give us a little bit of detail about that.
Right. My big forehead, that's another, a dead giveaway. But yeah, this is just a traditional Ethiopian attire. It's called a abashak amis, and you can see a cross here. Um, and then the necklace is also a cross. It's an Aksumite cross, and from the Aksum Empire, the Aksumite Empire of Ethiopia. I still struggle with it to this day, like in what my identity is as a African American. I've gotten a better understanding of it, like as I've gotten older, uh, but I still have to come to terms with it. And basically, what it comes down to is, I was born in America, right? So I'm American. And when I go to school, I speak English, and my friends speak English. However, at home, I live in a very Ethiopian household. Both my parents born in Ethiopia. It's like this tale of two stories, right? Something being in the household versus being outside the household, and in the household, like in my household, for example, there's two different Ethiopian languages spoken. My dad speaks Amharic. My mom speaks Tigrinya and Amharic, and then my grandma only speaks Tigrinya. And then there's English, of course, too, right? So, and I don't speak either fluently. I speak them, at an elementary level, I'd say, but I can understand quite a bit. I'm living in a very African household, Ethiopian to be specific, and then identifying with that blackness, but then also going outside of the household and me being an American-born citizen, identifying with African American culture, So I've always found those two tough to balance because I can't say I'm one or the other only, I can't say I'm like only African American, because that would be erasing my Ethiopian history and my Ethiopian side of my blackness. But then on the same sense, I can't say I'm straight up just Ethiopian, because I don't speak the languages fluently, and I wasn't born there. I've never lived there. I've only been there twice. So that has been a struggle for me, and the way I've been able to cope with it is just accepting that I'm both, and some of the ways I've been trying to accept my Ethiopian history and culture even more, because it's tough when you don't speak the language fluently, is I'm taking a Tigrinya class right now, and virtually, which is great, and I found it. And so hopefully I'll be able to speak with my grandma some more, because she only speaks Tigrinya, and she lives with us at home. So I'm currently on that journey, and it's like that's like one of my ultimate goals is if I can become fluent in either Amharic or Tigrinya, then like I will be very proud of myself in that in that sense, and happy knowing that I'll be able to pass the language on to other people and hopefully my future kids.
I mean, it's like you've got these essentially three different identities. I was wondering if maybe you feel that they're kind of in conflict, or if it's almost like a little bit more like you've got three kind of half full glasses, and you'd like to get each one a little bit more full. That accumulation of that culture.
Yeah, that's pretty much how it feels, and you just have to kind of accept that you won't be satisfied fully with all of your identities, you know? Some might wonder like, oh well, why didn't you just learn the languages if it was spoken in your household? Well, that's the challenge of living in America where your family speaks another language. Is America isn't a very language friendly country. It's just very, speak English, only English, and that's it. You compare it to countries like in Europe or Ethiopia, which are places I've been to, and you'll see signs that are in multiple languages, sometimes three, and you do see Spanish here in America, here and there, but I think it's not just having it on signs and stuff. It's people need to be willing to hear another language, right? And be open to it, and then learn a little bit of it too. Unfortunately, like America isn't like that, and in order to have an easier time in America, I'll say, it's best for you to learn English fluently, right? And so that was something that had to be decided by my parents growing up. It's like, we could teach him Amharic and Tigrinya for sure, but will that come at the cost of his English skills, right?
They're looking out for you.
Exactly. Exactly. And ultimately, like, I'm so happy that they raised me the way they did. I have no regrets at all on that. But that's another like conflict and a challenge is, what do? Do you erase some of your culture in order for the success or potential success of your kin? Or do you preserve your culture and then have it potentially be a barrier or an obstacle for, your kin? So
being that Black History Month is, a time to reflect and a time to honor, I'm wondering if you feel that as a country we're doing enough currently to give that kind of honor to the specific kind of Black voices and identities that have done so much for America in the past. If you feel that as a country we're adequately reflecting the achievements of the Black community as a whole.
I'd say as of late, the past year, let's say, I'd say yes. We're making progress towards that for sure. And I think people are more comfortable to speak on Black history and highlight it and tell the truth about it and not erase it. I think there's more we could emphasize on because we're not done for sure. One, there's plenty more Black American history left to be told. But there's, like I mentioned earlier, like the only Black people aren't just in America. We have plenty across the world. And I think that we need to do a much better job here in the States of learning about that history. Because that's another thing I've noticed with the pre-collegiate education I received is that it was very American centered, right, or Eurocentric, right, and it didn't even, it didn't even talk much about like South American culture, let alone African culture, So I think we need to shift to a more global understanding and appreciation of Black history. The first thing that comes to my mind, because it does relate to my family, is Ethiopian history. And like a lot of people don't know that, well, a lot of people know that a lot of Africa was colonized by Europeans. However, Ethiopia was the first country to successfully fend off European invasion by the Italians. And so I actually have a pretty interesting story, if I could share it with you, on my great-grandfather, um, that I would love, like to highlight and just tell, because I'm gonna tell it super casually, but the unfortunate truth is I think a lot of people have this kind of history that I'm gonna share with you, and it's unfortunately like normalized. But essentially, my great-grandfather on my mom's side, his name was Bahata Waldahana, was the Kenyazmach, or like the mayor or leader of his city and village in northern Ethiopia in the Tigray region. And what's funny is, speaking of pre-collegiate education, I actually got to write a paper on it, on my personal family history. It was a way of me preserving my own family history. So every once in a while I check it just to make sure I remember the story in full. But essentially, in the late 1800s, after the, I think they call it the Berlin Conference, forgetting if that's what it was called, but essentially all the European powers got together and were like, we're going to divide up Africa neatly, and you take this side, you take this country, all that. And so Italy got the Ethiopian region or area, and in about the late 1800s, they took control of Eritrea. The Italians did, which was, at the time, Eritrea and Ethiopia were one country called Ethiopia, and they just took that northern region of Ethiopia called Eritrea, and they had that as a stronghold. And so my great-grandfather, mayor and leader of his village, was not in Eritrea. He was south of that in the Tigray region of Ethiopia, so in the occupied area. The Italian forces were trying to come in and get him and target him because he was a leader. And so he went off and hid in the mountains and took advantage of the terrains there because the Italians didn't know how to navigate it. So they went to his family and said, like, where is he? And obviously, his family didn't say anything until they threatened to kill his entire family. So once he heard that, he came out of hiding and turned himself in to save his family. So they took him captive, the Italians did, and they took him back to Italy for about 6 months as a prisoner. And they eventually brought him back to Eritrea, where they still had him captive. At the age of about 50, he started to get kind of sick. And so the Italians were trying to make it seem like they wanted to help him and give him some medicine. But instead of medicine, they gave him poison. And so he was killed, never got to return to his family. I do have one picture of him, which is kind of cool. I don't know where and how the picture was taken because this is a long time ago, like over 120 years ago or so. That's the history of my great-grandfather, Bahata Waldahana. And how this ties in with like Ethiopian history. One of the interesting aspects of Ethiopian culture is our cuisine, and we eat raw meat, raw beef. We just dip it in some seasoning called mitmita, and you just make sure it's a good cut and that it's fresh, and you just dip it in that spice seasoning and you eat it. At the time when Italians were trying to invade and colonize Ethiopia, which they tried to do twice, in the late 1800s and then again in the 1930s, the Ethiopians that were fighting against the Italians were in the terrain, in the Rocky Mountains, like I mentioned, and they didn't want to start fires because fires give up your location, right? So they were forced to eat, raw meat so as to not disclose their locations. And I think you could say that maybe contributed to them defending Ethiopia successfully. That is a part of Black history that is like near and dear to my heart. And I also learned recently that, my grandfather was also the owner of basically land that made up an entire city in the northern Tigray region in Ethiopia. And so, that made me feel proud and just made me feel like I shouldn't put any limitations on myself here in America, because I'm like, yeah, maybe one day I can own, plenty of land and be a leader wherever I'm residing. I just wanted to give like one example and a small story of the type of Black history that there is still left to be highlighted.
The NAACP wrote somewhat recently about the words of Carter G. Woodson and how he hoped that at some point in the future there might not be a need for Black History Month. Do you feel as though, given everything that's kind of transpired in the last year, is America heading in that direction? Are we on that trajectory?
I think we are. We're on that trajectory. We're not there yet, but we're on that trajectory. And the way I know is, you look back to Carter G. Woodson, and funny enough, I actually have him on my wall. I keep a picture of him and a quote there, and it's just coincidence. I got it when I went to the Museum of African American History in Detroit for a conference that I went to. Just happened to pick it up. Didn't even know who he was until I bought that piece at that museum. But he started with Negro History Week, and then it evolved to Black History Month. And let me go back. He started with Negro History Week because it was evident that in America, Black history wasn't even appreciated a single day out of the year.
There was no concept of Black history.
So what do you do when you want somebody to accept something? You can't just, come at them with full force. It's not just words. You got to start it slowly, and it's just like, I feel like it's like typical classical like negotiation, right? So it started with Negro History Week. Push it a little further, becomes Black History Month, which we've kind of been stuck on that for a long time. And I think you're starting to see now a lot of people giving the responses like, Black History Month is every month, So I think we are progressing towards that. Not fully there yet. Maybe certain areas in America are, but definitely not the whole country. So we still got some work to do. But
to all the allies, and, people who want to be involved in the Black liberation struggle overall, what would you say in terms of how they can start to get more engaged and to kind of look past the idea of Black History Month as just being this month, and to really look forward to that future where we no longer have to celebrate?
For me, I think it would be having an Afrocentric perspective and view towards anything you do. It could be something as simple as, all right, you might own your own coffee shop, right? Well, did you know that coffee was first invented in Ethiopia? And by invented, I mean Ethiopians were the first ones to take the plant and then turn it into the drink that we now call coffee. Having an intentionally Afrocentric lens in whatever you do, I think will allow people to consistently appreciate Black history. Because I think if you are willing to view history and society through a lens that isn't jaded with, white supremacy or anti-Blackness, you will find that there's a lot of African history within world history, within our history, right? And, for so long our history has been erased and just not appreciated. And it just takes a little extra digging, a little extra learning to find and appreciate that history. So that would be like what I encourage people to do going forward, is just know that whatever you're doing, there's probably something that's African, that's rooted in it, right? So find that thing and appreciate it and take note of it, and then share the information when you learn it, is like what I would say.
When you say our history, I like that, because that is the kind of mindset where it's not just your history in the past, it's our history in the present and in the future.
Right.
What's in the making right now?
Exactly.
What do you think? Where are we headed? 5, 10 years? What is Black history going to look like in your ideal kind of world?
It's hard for me to say in 5 to 10 years, to be honest. I don't really know. Well, I mean, my dream and like ultimate hope is for everyone to know where their ancestors are from. But it's really hard, obviously, because people were snatched from Africa and kidnapped and, essentially separated, mixed up so that they forgot where they were from, or, couldn't communicate and preserve their culture. That would be like what I hope for when it comes to Black history is, being able to look back and be like, yeah, I know the lineage I come from and the ancestors I also come from, right? And I think when you know that, like, that's super powerful, because you know that it's bigger than you, and there were a lot more that came before you. So, and what better, and I think this goes for everyone. It's not, I don't think it's like, it's just Black people, but Black people in particular have had history erased like no other skin tone on earth. But I think we can agree that like all people would like to go as far back in their history as they possibly could. But funny enough, if everybody went as far back as they could in their history, you'd find that you're from Africa, right? You'd find that the first humans were, in Africa, specifically Ethiopia. So, yeah, if you can't tell, I love Ethiopia. I love my culture and my country. I gotta check my position and my privilege though. Like whenever I go to Ethiopia though, I'm not Ethiopian. I'm American. They know I'm Ethiopian American, but they view me as, as an American. So I have accepted that. That's all right and that's okay. So I just want to say that is that like I'm not claiming to be like representing Ethiopia or anything like that. I don't even think I could fairly do that, because there are people that were born in Ethiopia and still live there that better represent it. But until we open up the doors for them to speak back home, I'll do the speaking as best as I can until I can hopefully return back to the motherland, which is a dream of mine, and hopefully reconnect in some way, whether it be through business, through philanthropy, or just visiting. Just again, like finding that balance of like being American and being Ethiopian, and appreciating both and accepting both. So, yeah, there you go.
If, for example, well, I'll be personal about this. When I was going to school, a school not very unlike this one, though not as pretty, I began to be bugged by the teaching of American history. I began to be bugged by the teaching of American history because it seemed that history had been accomplished without my presence.